In. Beautiful. So welcome, Sharon, my dear teacher. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It is my privilege, Katie.
So the subject that we're going to talk about is one of my favorite subjects, and I know it's one of Sharon's favorite subjects. We're going to talk about activism. Sharon is a lifelong activist, and I have learned so much from her about skillful means within activism. I think that's really one of the most integral parts of the Jivamukti Yoga Method. Is it's not just activism standalone, it's skillful means, or what we might call spiritual activism. So for those who aren't as familiar with the Jivamukti Method or with our approach to activism, Sharon, I'd love to start by just asking you to speak a little bit to the difference between traditional activism and what we might call spiritual activism.
Let us first do an invocation, because that will help us all to understand what spiritual activism could possibly mean to us in our lives. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. And may the thoughts, words, and actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om. Jai Shri Krishna. Katie, I'm not sure if I can address how activism, the difference, because I don't know any other activism. I mean, I've heard about it, but I don't feel educated to speak on other people's ideas of activism. All I know is that whatever you want to have happen in your own life, that the best starting place is to make that happen for others. Swami Satchidananda, who was a great saint, and I was very privileged to be a good friend of his, be considered a friend. He said, who will be the happiest person? The one who brings happiness to others. We all want happiness. And it's interesting that most of us forget that the happiness that we want, we can have if we are willing to do all we can to contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for others. To be a spiritual activist is to be motivated by the Spirit. That's simply what it means. Perhaps you were referring to the type of activism which is motivated by anger or sadness or blame. I'm not interested in that kind of activism because it doesn't really produce lasting results. That is my experience. The kind of activism that can truly move mountains, open cages, transform lives, bring more happiness to individuals and to the world and to yourself as an activism is the activism that comes from love, the supreme love, the love which is actually what our souls are made of, the Atman, the eternal aspect of ourself, which of course, that soul is in every being, regardless of gender, species, religion, or anything like that. So that's kind of my take on activism.
Sharon, do you feel that the way that you've been practicing activism, or the ways that you've been supporting others to practice activism, has changed over the years? Do you see a need for different approach at this time, or is it always the same?
It seems for me, it's always been the same. I've always been motivated in this way. Perhaps that, okay, I'm going to take your question very seriously to allow it to put me on the spot, do some self-reflection. And I will say, because recently I had some challenging situations, and which are opportunities, of course. And I found myself falling into anger, losing my patience. And I was able to realize when that was happening, and to quickly dispel it through mantra and get back on track. And the feeling of getting back on track is incredibly invigorating. When you can, it's a meditation. Activism is a meditation. To cultivate patience will free you from anger. Anger directed at yourself or at others. So yeah, so I have changed a bit in my approach, where I recognize that getting upset with other people, that they're not whatever, they're not doing whatever I think would be the best thing to do, and just catching it, nipping it, and knowing that that is that's blame, and that's anger, and that's not going to help anything, and that's coming from me. I'm making them that way. So
I feel like I can see that there are many Jivamukti yoga teachers on this call, and they'll all have a very good understanding of the answer to this question. But there are also many on the call who are not Jivamukti yoga teachers. So I'd love to ask you this for our broader community. Sharon, for you, what's the link between our actions in the world and our politics and the teachings of yoga?
the word politic means the body, the greater body. What is larger than your body, the greater body, or we could say the community. So others. Yoga deals with self and other. And the biggest obstacle, we could say, to enlightenment, yoga, which means enlightenment, or samadhi, is otherness. And so to dissolve the otherness, the practices of yoga are designed to do that. And help me out here. Where are we going with this? I'm sorry.
So the connection between yoga teaching and politic and activism. Like, why is it important for a yogi to be an activist? Is it important for a yogi to be an activist?
It's a very important, it is the essential thing, because without coming to terms with the others in your life in a good way, no yoga is possible. Because we are more than the limits of our bodies, the limits of our mind, the limits of our personalities. We contain everyone that we have ever known, met, or thought about, actually or virtually. And we all know this because they show up in our dreams, they show up in our thoughts when we're awake. And if those thoughts are bothersome to us, or they cause us some disturbance, they disturb our natural serenity, then we must do something about those bad people. But those bad people are coming from us. We're making them bad. That's the essential teaching that Patanjali describes to us, that vastu samye chitta bedatayor vibhaktaha pantaha. Each individual person sees the same object or the same other, person, according to their own state of mind and projections. Everything and everyone is empty. It appears according to how we see it. And how we see others, how we see the world, how we see ourselves, of course, is dependent totally on our karmas, our past actions. We can't just decide, oh, I'm going to see a heavenly realm here. I'm going to see angels. I'm going to live in a place where everyone loves me and everyone is kind and speaks sweetly, and make that happen just like that. We have to work on it. And the work has to do with our actions in relation to others. So the relational aspect of life, of death, of afterlife, of the in-between, of all the states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, all of it is all relational. So the whole system of yoga, or pretty much any spiritual practice, addresses ways to dissolve otherness, to take responsibility for what you see out there in the world. Most unenlightened people, like me, myself, perhaps most of us, I don't know, think of the world as out there coming at us, or think of the other people in the world as out there coming at us. But yoga teaches that it's just the reversal. What we see, what appears out there, including everyone else, regardless if they're a human being or a cow or a dog or a cat, it's coming from our own minds. So if we don't like what we see, Patanjali tells us we should get busy and change our perception. Don't blame the world. Don't blame what's out there. Realize it as an opportunity to purify your own mind. In the Jivamukti system, we follow the teachings of a great saint and acharya who lived, he was born in 1479, he died in 1531, Vallabhacharya. Vallabhacharya's Pushti Marg, or the path of grace. And Vallabhacharya is considered one of the 5 great acharyas or teachers in Indian teachers. And his philosophy is very much in accordance with Patanjali. And it stresses this point that I'm trying to communicate or explain, that to be free of anger and blame, which I think is a good thing to aspire to, understand that everything in the world is coming from the way that we see it. So we must change our own minds and our own projections. And that could be a long process, but the essential aspect of that process is kindness, compassion, forgiveness, letting go of blame, anger, jealousy, pride, because they don't serve that clear perception that we're going for.
Thank you, Sharon. I was reflecting about some of your books and your writing work as I was preparing to chat with you today, and I was thinking about the book Yoga and Vegetarianism, and remembering that when it first came out, it was titled Yoga and Vegetarianism, and more recently has been republished as Yoga and Veganism. And I feel like that's such a positive thing, because perhaps a few years ago when the book was first published, there was less of a open-mindedness about veganism, and people saw it as more of a kind of niche market, or you know, that it might put people off, or it was too extreme. And now it seems to me that veganism is much more widely known about and practiced and understood, and people are really open to the idea of a plant-based diet and the idea of caring for the animals through what we eat. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about what you have noticed in terms of how we've progressed in that regard. Of course, there's still so much work to do, but I feel like there's also a lot to be celebrated. Do you feel the same?
Yes. Celebration is always a good idea. Yes, I really like to focus on finding goodness and celebrating that, rather than finding fault and it's too depressing. So yes, the title of the book, well, the new book, Yoga and Veganism, is really a lot different. It's 3 times as big as the first book. And I'm very happy to say that there are many stories in the new book from other people. So that's always a relief for me, because I like to be around. It's just my words, but here you get so many other people's words in the book too, and their stories about their journey to veganism, and amazing stories. Like one woman who was a lobbyist for the Pork Association in Washington, D.C. Now she's a vegan activist. Ingrid Newkirk tells her story. Founder, president of PETA. Kip Anderson, filmmaker, who has done incredible films, Cowspiracy and What the Health, and the most recent one, Seaspiracy. He tells his story. And I'm very happy with that book. But the title for the first edition, Yoga and Vegetarianism, to me, veganism is vegetarian. I'm a stickler for words. So if you say you're a vegetarian, that should mean that you eat vegetables. So, but anyway, so people ask me, so did you have to, was the title of the first book, Vegetarianism, you had to compromise and now you feel more free with the new title, Vegan? And I'm like, well, actually, no, I think it should be vegetarian, but no, I'm kind of just rambling on now. I'm sorry. I'm very happy that veganism is a lot more accepted everywhere. Yes, Katie, I agree. That was my long-winded answer. Yes, let's celebrate it.
And yes, and for people who are listening, if you are wondering about the connection between vegetarianism and yoga, if you have any questions about that, please buy Sharon's book and read it, because every question you could possibly have on that subject is very covered in a lot of detail in that wonderful book. It's an incredible offering. I have one last question that I want to ask Sharon, but I also really want this session to be made available to you, to the participants. So please, as we continue to talk, I'd love to invite you to put your questions into the chat, and then I'll kind of moderate and I'll pass some of those on to Sharon. So those of you who are joining us live, please go ahead and put any questions that you have into the chat right now, and we'll make sure that we get to those in just a moment. My final question is a little bit off topic, but it's actually a question I've been pondering for many years and I've wanted to ask you, Sharon, so it feels like now is my opportunity. In the Jivamukti teachings and in the way that you teach and who you are as a person, there's a huge amount of freedom. There's a huge amount of what I've heard you and David refer to many times as wildness and spontaneity and a connection to the natural world, which isn't always linear and kind of well organized, let's say. But then at the same time, I see in you and have seen in you for so many years such a huge amount of discipline and strategy and organization. And I'm just so interested to hear you speak about how we balance those two pathways. How do we balance the pathway of discipline, and particularly in our spiritual lives, and a sense of strategy and purpose with the spontaneous and the wild?
Well, first of all, I don't think of wildness as chaotic or unorganized. I see wildness as extremely organized and timely, on time. And I think the greatest freedom comes through discipline. The most severe discipline yields the greatest freedom. And I certainly learned that as a dancer when I studied ballet, and continue to learn through my yoga practice. I'm a very scheduled person. I'm very, very scheduled. I mean, I do the same thing every day and I don't miss it. I do it. I don't, no matter how I feel emotionally, I stick to the practice. Because I learned something about how the asanas work. I don't know if I could explain it in a very succinct way to all of us here today, but let's just say they're spiritual practices. Now, what does that mean? It sounds like, yeah, right. Okay, we all know that. But what I'm trying to describe is they're practices that you do. They're in preparation when you don't have a body. What I've seen is that most of us think, although we see death and we know it will happen, we don't think it will happen to us. I mean, this is the famous line that Yudhishthira says in the Mahabharata, that it's the most interesting observation that he has made about human beings. Seeing death all around them, they never think it will happen to them. And so we don't prepare. Discipline prepares you. I mean, that's living a disciplined life, having a practice that you do every day, same time, is like a lifeline. And because when you drop the body, what will you have? You have that practice, and you won't have it unless it's firmly ingrained in you, not superficially, just on a sensational physical level. It has to penetrate into all the layers of your being, into your emotional body, into your mind, beyond the senses. And mantra, mantra is a very disciplined practice. To resort to the mantra, whatever your mantra is, you will do it automatically. If you practice it enough, if you're disciplined enough, it'll kick in automatically. And it'll kick in automatically at the time of death. If you can practice waking up while you are alive, and of course, lucid dreaming helps us to do that. But of course, we're dreaming when we're in the Jagrat state too, the waking state. But the practices, discipline helps to keep you awake. That kind of wakefulness, which is what we're talking about when we talk about conscious awareness, that you are more than your ego, that you're more than you're grasping the things you want, the things you like, the things you dislike. You're more than that. But if you don't give yourself a chance to let those things go once in a while and just stick to something, you won't know that.
Thank you. I'm going to move to the questions now from participants. Teresa has a question. She says, as students of yoga and teachers, do you have a suggestion for introducing the idea of spiritual activism and gentle examples to a class? So how can we start to introduce these ideas in a teaching context?
In an asana class, yes. Teach students how to dedicate the merits of the practice to someone else, to actually visualize that person, whoever they may be. They don't have to be a human being, but to dedicate it to someone else. That is the beginning stages of getting over our attachment to our ego, or the misidentification of who we are with our body and mind. And that is the purpose of yoga, to get over yourself. And so to think of someone else while you're doing your practice traditionally, you would think of your guru, but now that is such a hot topic. People feel very put off and they don't want to do that. Okay. Then as teachers, suggest another object of devotion. But having an object to devote yourself to, which is not you, is very beneficial.
Thank you. Abhidaya asks, how do you personally feel about modern yoga, the focus on postures above ethics, people calling themselves yogis but not following the ethical principles?
I don't think about that. I don't think about what other people are doing badly or not doing good enough or what they should be doing. for goodness sake, I'm just trying to purify myself. That's a lot on my plate to begin with. And, you know, my teacher, Sri Brahmananda Saraswati, his persistent teaching to us was mind your own business. Your mind, purify it of judgment, blame, anger. You see, when you get too involved in judging other people, what they're doing or what they're not doing or what they should be doing, then you're minding their business. And when you're minding their business, you can't mind your own business. And then your mind is fragmented into a million shatters, trying to fix other people. You should fix yourself first. Free yourself of those debilitating negative emotions. Judging others is a huge debilitating negative emotion. Judgment, blame, anger, jealousy, you know, these are poisons. They don't help us. They don't, you know, the best way, if you want to change that other person, then see them as you would like to see them. And if you can't see them like that yet, then you have to work on your own mind. Because usually, if you want to see an enlightened being, the formula is it takes one to know one. You know, here's something very interesting. At the time of death, it is said in many scriptures, and my friend Bob Thurman was talking about that, about this very thing. And he wrote a wonderful translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead about it. But he says that at the moment of death, everyone actually sees God, or whatever you call it, the clear light. But most people don't recognize it. It just totally is over their head. They just miss it completely. And that's what happens in our waking life too, in our everyday life. Saints we might come face to face with a saint, but if our own minds are so filled with the poisons of blame and anger and judgment, we won't see it. We won't see the saintliness. We won't see the holiness. We won't see it when we look in the mirror. Looking in a mirror, looking at another person's face is looking in a mirror. You see yourself. So, you know, I mean, other people will do what they're going to do, of course, but I really don't have time to do that. I have a limited time to be alive, and I've made the commitment, loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. So I want to do everything I possibly can to clear my mind of negativity and see goodness in others. And as you said, Katie, let's celebrate every little ounce of goodness that we see, and then it starts to grow. Mm. Is there another question?
Yeah, there's lots of questions coming in.
Oh, good.
I'm just going to pick a couple. This one's a slightly different subject. In yogic philosophy and practices, where can I find teachings that will help me to heal from a sexual abuse or trauma?
Oh, you know, when I first started teaching yoga, I was asked questions like this, specific questions, like healing questions. Someone would say, I have this particular issue. What asana should I do? I had this particular emotional experience. What asana will help me? I have come to realize over the last, I don't know how many years I've been teaching and practicing, there is no one except for Ishvara Pranidhanat Va, what Patanjali says. That's the one-step method. Surrender your life, all of your experiences to God. Just devote everything, whatever traumas, whatever terrible things have happened to you, devote everything, offer it at the feet of the Lord. Well, if you can't seem to do that, then of course he has the two-step program. Patanjali says, Abhyasa and Vairagya. Practice and have detachment for your practice. Like just do it without an aim in mind. Okay, if that's too hard, then he has the three-step program, which is, we know it as Kriya Yoga. Some people refer to it as Kriya Yoga. It's what the third chapter of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is about. Tapas Swadhyaya. I'm sorry. And then he has the 8-step program. And so he's trying, he's trying to give something that will work for everybody. But the 8-step program is, of course, Yama Niyama Asana Pranayama Pratyahara Dhyana Dharana and Dhyana and Samadhi. So what to do? Start wherever you can.
We have just a couple more minutes before we wrap up, and we'll end with a question from dear Sandy King, long-time Jivamukti teacher here in Sydney, Australia. And Sandy's been very kindly putting all of the references to the Yoga Sutras in the chat as we've been going as well. Thank you, Sandy. So if anyone's wondering which particular sutras Sharon's been referencing, they're all there for you. Sandy just would love to know how you're doing, Sharon. She'd love to hear, and I know many people on this call would too, what you've been up to, how the pandemic has impacted your and David's life, how you both are. We'd love to just hear how you are.
I can speak for David, I'll include David here and myself. We love being hermits. We feel very grateful, actually, to stay home. And it's not that we didn't like it when we were traveling all over the world and meeting so many wonderful people and being invited to teach and to give talks. But I have to say, I don't miss it. I welcome what has happened, causing us to stay home. And so I'm writing a new book. I'm in the editing process now, and been working on that for over a year now. And maybe this spring it will be available. And it's called Eternity is Happening Now. Titles. David is very occupied with taking care of the forest here and all the animal beings that live with us. which is a pretty full-time job with feeding and changing the hay. So they have a place to rest and get out of the snow. And so we have a herd of about 37 deer and wild turkeys that David attends to several times a day. And the practices, the yoga practices, for me, I mean, every day, Krishna Seva and my Takarji and pranayama and kriyas, asanas, reading. We read from the holy books every day. After we offer food and eat the prasad, then we read from the Srimad Bhagavatam. And we're on the 7th canto now, after many years. So we read 3 different translations of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the same verses in 3 different translations. And then it's followed by the Mahabharata. So we read also from 3 different translations of the Mahabharata. So that happens every day, same time, we're on schedule. And yeah.
Can you share with us a little bit about what the new book is about?
Oh, sure. Essays and stories. Some of the essays, if you're familiar with the focus of the month essays, you will see some of those, but they're not like how you might have remembered them. They're in their original version, which is much longer, then I had to abridge it to fit on 1 page. My own, restriction. I did that myself. No one else did that for me. But and some of them have been expanded. So from their short version, they've lengthened. There are stories, lots of stories that I don't think anyone has read before, besides David, because a writer, when you write, you have to read it out loud. You're writing and it's very painful, but it has to be done. You have to do it because then if it works or not. And you don't want to read it to somebody who will just sit and listen and then at the end say, oh, it's so great. Oh, it's so nice. No, you need a harsh critic. And I have one in this house. His name is David Life. And so he's not impressed with much of anything. So I love it. I love that. And so he makes me better. I have to communicate more clearly and it's good. I like to work hard. And so there's stories, there's 2 different kinds of stories. The book is volume 1 and volume 2, actually. So there's 2 volumes. It's quite a large thing. Volume 1, the stories are contemporary. I might change that title, but contemporary stories. And volume 2, they're ancient stories. So the contemporary stories are stories about my own life, actual experiences. There's quite a few of my experiences with Shamdas in India, and also in Woodstock, and some stories of my childhood. And there's a wonderful story about my mother when she was a hobo riding the freight trains and living under the stars and with pretty much nothing. And then she meets the love of her life. And I mean, this is, I was grown up. She was in her 40s when she did this. And then how he was shot and lay dying in a pool of blood. And she walked to the police station to get help at about 3 a.m. And yeah. And then anyway, it's very exciting stories, I think. I mean, I hope the readers will too. And then the ancient stories are insights that I've had about like how the Srimad Bhagavatam was written, what Vyas was going through that prompted him to write it. And, you know, one of my favorite saintly beings is Narada. So Narada plays a pivotal role in that story, and Shukadev Goswami, of course, the embodiment of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And I have a story of the death of Krishna, and Valmiki, story about Valmiki before he became a best-selling author. Story that not many people know about, maybe certainly know about him afterwards, right? But when he was a thief, when he was like a, you know, kind of a con man. Anyway, yeah, so I have stories about death and how to die. Well, I have essays, but there are stories embedded in the essays. And hopefully they'll be helpful to people, because I feel that that's an area that's neglected a lot in, yeah. And I feel it shouldn't be neglected. So I'm doing something to contribute to maybe bringing some more practical outlook towards death and how to prepare for death.
I can't wait to read it. I loved the autobiographical elements of Magic is a Shift in Perception, your poetry book. I enjoyed it so much. So it sounds like there'll be more of that, which I personally really look forward to. And I know many people listening will as well. Sharon, I just want to thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for being here. I know that I'm speaking on behalf of many people, particularly those in the Jivamukti Yoga here in Australia, the community here, in thanking you for being here with us and joining us today.
Katie, thank you. Thank you, Katie G, for all that you have done, not just for Australia and yoga practitioners there, but all the work you did in London and how you've touched the whole world, really. And you keep at it. You seem to have boundless enthusiasm. I mean, you're really a Wonder Woman. Thank you. And you've inspired myself, and please continue to inspire so many women.
Thank you. Namaste. Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Okay, we'll take a break now, and we'll be back at 11. So please stay and join us for the next session at 11, and take a short break. And in the meantime, thank you so much, Sharon G. Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.